Hey everybody, how you doing? Welcome back to the Another Nobody Show with me, your favorite nobody, Travis Myers. This week we're going to do something a little different. In honor of the anniversary of 9/11 happening this week, we are going to rebroadcast a show that I was interviewed on back in 2023. Okay? It was the 500 Section Lounge, and the fellas from the 500 Section Lounge were gracious enough to allow me to rebroadcast my 9/11 story with you this week. And that's it. This is my 9/11 story here on Storytime with Travis.
Story time, story time, story time with Travis. Story time, story time, story time with Travis. Hey Travis, tell us a story.
Yeah, how are you today, buddy?
I'm doing well. I'm doing very well, Sam. How are you doing?
Well, the topic we're getting ready to talk about is one of those that I've mentioned multiple times that we it stands really big in my life, and it helps that I'm a history teacher. So every September 11th, I would always bring in a special lesson or something to kind of talk about it, because those kids that I was teaching at that time, they didn't know much about what happened on September 11th, 2001. What are your impressions from that day? What do you remember from that day, and where were you? That type of thing.
I was at Ball State. I think I was a sophomore in college, and I was actually going to a speech class when I was walking up, and I people were walking by talking about something that planes had crashed in New York. Nobody really knew what happened. So kind of through that day, I listened to some talk radio, some sports radio, and they addressed it a little bit too. Our professor talked about it a little bit. And then the next thing that I can only really recall from that is watching all the videos and then being at my afternoon class. And I was a PE major, as you know. Now I teach special education, but after history, and just started talking about it. Everybody was talking about it. And one of my things was, I bet it was an act of terrorism. I bet somebody did it to us because they hate us. And that was in 2001.
Yeah, I can tell you actually to the minute where I was, what I was doing. I was also in college still. I had transferred from Ball State and was going to then IPFW in Fort Wayne, and we were commuters. My buddy and I, Jared and I, were commuters together, and we always left at right around 9:15 or so every day. And so I was sitting in my living room waiting for Jared to come pick me up, and he never normally came inside. He just would, pull up, and I'd walk out there, and he walked in, and he's like, "Hey, change it to the news real quick. There was a plane that hit the World Trade Towers." And so I flipped it, and as soon as I did, this was at 9:05. That's when the second plane hit. So I literally flipped it over and watched the second plane strike it, and it was unbelievable, because at that point, that becomes not an accident. We'd had it before, to where planes had hit the tower, big, little small planes that just didn't realize where they were or whatever and hit the tower. But that second one was like, oh, there's issues. Well, there was
going on.
Yeah, there was something going on. And so we still went to school. We drove to Fort Wayne and listened to Bob and Tom. They weren't laughing. They were talking about what was going on, because that second plane hit. And then there was news that another plane had gone down in Washington, D.C. And it was just an unreal thought or thing going on. We went to school. The student lounges were never more than 4 or 5 kids, students in there. They were packed because the TV was on. They were watching what was going on. And I was working as a bartender, went to the bar to work that night. TV was on news, never was on news any other time. And the place was packed, all watching the news. It was just an unreal feeling. And it was one of those that it was actually surreal, almost like a surreal feeling. And I have often said that this is what my mom would call her JFK moment. This is my JFK moment. I can tell you exactly what was going on, where I was, what we were doing, what I did that day. And it was just a real surreal day. And I was just a college student, and so were you.
Yeah, that didn't know, really anything about life at all, and finding out that this sure seemed like it was on purpose, and this is crazy, and all those people passed away, just had their life taken away, and those buildings came down. Like,
Yeah, in the process of living, we've hosted exchange students and been part of exchange programs and stuff. And I met a girl that her birthday is September 11th. And on September 11th, 2001 was her third birthday. And her father was flying to New York City on her birthday, or out of New York City on her birthday. And he was in the second plane that hit the towers. So like she said she felt horrible because she never really got to remember her dad because she was 18 at the time that I met her. And so like it was more than just Americans that were affected by this. But um we're gonna bring in our guest today. He's been on multiple two other times in the past. He's quickly becoming a loyal lounger, Richie. I do firmly believe that he is becoming a loyal lounger for us. But it's author, a former NYPD detective and author of the Tommy Keene novel series, Travis Myers. Travis, thanks so much for coming in and joining us on this 9/11 special.
Well, good to see you, Sam. Richie, how you guys doing?
Yeah, very well, very well.
yep. Thanks for being here, Travis. Can't wait to
Yeah.
talk about
Well,
this.
thank you guys for having me. It was funny, just listening to you guys, I was fairly relaxed, and I can already feel my heart beating a little bit faster listening to your own stories, and I guess bringing back my own memories. We're going to talk about 9/11 now and my experiences with it. I've never spoken publicly, not that I'm a big shot public figure, but I've never spoken publicly about my experiences. And really, although, my wife, my family, some of my friends, we've had discussions about it before, I've never laid it out, I guess the way we're going to discuss it today. So again, feel free to ask me anything you want to ask. And, I'll tell you my story.
Well, let's do a little groundwork. You'd retired by September 11th of 2001.
Correct. I had retired months before. You guys already know the story, but I'll just give you a quick thing for your listeners who maybe didn't listen before. I was working in the New York City Police Department. I was a detective working for the Bronx Narcotics Division. And I had a very nice young drug dealer kick a door closed on my hand to cut my index finger off and smash up my middle finger really good, basically, crippling them.
Yeah.
And 8 months later, I was out of a job. And that was just, actually, when I was out of a job, when I retired, was just months before September 11th. So on September 10th, as it happened, I was already doing security work, or at that time doing security work for a company that made television commercials, music videos, movies, things like this. All right. Mm-hmm. Sounds kind of cool and romantic, but really it was quite boring, to tell you the truth. And on that day, on September 10th, I was doing an overnight in Oradell, New Jersey. We were making a Chrysler commercial, and I can almost guarantee you saw it because after it had come out, I had seen it dozens and dozens of times. And anyway, so I finished up my shift. I had done like an 8 to 8. It was a 12-hour shift, and I had left at 8 o'clock in the morning. And I was on the Parkway heading back to my home. At the time, I was living in Brewster, New York, and the traffic was just packed, unbelievable traffic, which is not unusual because, most people that live in that area of New Jersey work in New York City.
Right.
And so it's always miserable. All right. So my drive was about an hour and 20 minutes. On that particular day, it took me about 3 hours to get home, just to tell you how insane it was. I had no idea that the attacks had happened, even though I was literally driving up the other side of the river from the attacks. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just was going to ask, do you not listen to the radio on the way home? And that's not me criticizing.
No. I did. I was about to say, I don't know if I had a CD in there or
cassette tapes. I can't remember what my car was at the time.
Yeah.
But I was listening to music, and I didn't have it going on. And I'm just sitting there losing my mind in traffic, waiting and waiting and waiting. And then, again, by the time I got home, it was probably, 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning. Everything had happened. It was over. And, after a 12-hour shift, I went straight to bed because I had to get up in a couple hours to get my kids off the school bus to pick them up from school. And that was kind of normal for me. Even while I worked in the police department, I had worked midnights for many years because it was the only way I could be with my children. My wife worked during the day. I would work nights and, make sure they got to school in the morning, got off the bus in the afternoon. It was a good setup that we had. So I went right to bed. No idea anything had happened. Until I had gotten up, I don't know, probably 1:30, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And back then, I still didn't have a cell phone. Cell phones weren't
as prevalent.
Exactly. And but the light was blinking. The red light was blinking on my phone. And I had, it said whatever it was, 52 messages, something ridiculous like that, because everybody had been calling me. And so I picked, I started listening to the messages. I'm like, what is this? What is this nonsense? What's going on here? And I turned the TV on and I was just, as all of us were, just shocked, shattered, in complete disbelief, and I watched it again and again and again and again, throughout the day. Made a couple of phone calls to friends and family and people, getting back to them. And I was just, I guess just a nervous wreck. I was pacing the floors, ran to the school bus, got my kids. And when my wife got home, about 5:30 in the afternoon, I said, we discussed it, momentarily and kind of got the initial shock out of our systems. And I said, I have to go. I can't wait here. So I was just the energy and the nervousness. And I say nervousness is actually the good word. There was no bravado in this at all. I was scared for my city, I guess. I don't know what it was. I had to go. I just had to go. That's all I knew. I packed a bag and
was your wife completely supportive of that, or was there
absolutely,
hey, you need to think about this for a minute, or was she?
No, not at all. I think she absolutely, besides that, it was, again, when I say our city, I don't want to belittle anybody else's feelings anywhere else in the nation, but for us it was very, very personal.
Sure.
Especially, I had just retired recently. I had friends that were, who knew who they were, that were down there, and cop friends, firefighter friends, people who we knew that worked in the area. A very dear friend of mine, Pat, actually worked for the ATF and actually worked in the building. And luckily for him, I laugh, he was late for work that day. Who knew? It could have been a much more tragic event for him, but he didn't make it in on time. And thank God, because it could have been really, really awful.
Well, there are a lot of stories that I've seen that, like the person was running late for work and forgot their keys in the house and turned around and walked in and got their keys, got back in their car and finally took off. And literally they were 10 minutes late, and it was just enough time for them to not be in their office.
Yep.
So what did you pack for your bag that you were taking up there? What'd you put together to drive up?
Clean pair of pants, half dozen t-shirts, socks, underwear, just regular stuff.
You anticipated it to be more than just a regular shift.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I didn't know what I was going to get myself into, and I wanted to make sure that I had stuff because, and I had never, except for once in the Army, we had helped with some tornado situation in North Carolina, and we had helped out with that. I had never, and of course in the police department, I did many crazy things that we've talked about in the past and we'll probably talk about in the future, but I had never done like any kind of large rescue operation, never been a part of it, but I knew that that's what this was going to be, and so I just wanted to prepare myself. I wanted to have some clean underwear.
Yeah, for sure.
Clean socks.
You followed your mother's orders, always have clean underwear.
Exactly. And so that was it. I left. I when I got on the train, the Metro North, headed down to the city, caught the subway, went down as far as I could. We could only go so far. Everything was jammed up. Everything was neighborhoods were shut down. It was kind of, blocked off. There, you couldn't get around. Traffic was a mess. The buses were a mess. Like my poor mother was working all the way. You guys may not be familiar with it, but she was working all the way down in Lower Manhattan. She could see the World Trade Center from her office. Okay, and she had to walk. She was, well into her 50s by then, and had to walk all the way home. Because
Yeah.
there was no way to get around. In fact, to correct myself, I don't think I took the subway at all. I think the subways were closed once I got to the city. I can't remember, to tell you the truth. But I'm going to say that was probably the case. And so, anyway, we had a real hard time getting down there, getting down to 9/11. And I had made it down to, there was an armory on, I want to say 25th Street. And I had hitched a ride with some National Guardsmen there. They had a big, 2.5-ton truck full of guys.
Right.
And I just told the guy, hey, look, guys, I'm coming with you. And at first they told me no, but I took out my shield, my police identification. Look, I'm going with you. Oh, come on in. No problem. And I hopped in the back with them. And we rode down to Battery Park. And then,
and for people that aren't sure, where is Battery Park compared to where
Battery Park is a few blocks south of Ground Zero, where the Twin Towers were.
Yeah.
Okay. And that and because it's a small park there at the end of the island, the Army, lots of the Red Cross, lots of places were using it as a staging area, because believe it or not, Wall Street, although it's New York City, all the streets are so old. They're very narrow. It's tough to get around, which I'm going to describe to you now. Once I got down there, I just hopped out and I was on my own, so I started walking north, and I want to say I was either on Trinity Street or Greenwich Street, and I headed north towards the World Trade Center. So I knew where I was going. I was familiar with the area. And I started walking up one of those streets, and it was so bizarre, because by the time I actually got down there, it was somewhere between midnight and 2 o'clock in the morning. To tell you the truth, I wasn't paying attention. It was quite a trek, leaving my house, getting down there. I mean, all in all, something that would have took a couple of hours probably took me 5 or 6 hours to physically get there, because you couldn't get there.
Right.
There was no hopping in a car. Like I said, the subways weren't working. Everything was blocked off and difficult. And I was lucky enough to hitch a ride with these soldiers from the National Guard. Anyway, I'm walking up Trinity or Greenwich Street. I can't remember exactly which one it was. And it was very, very strange. I guess the word would be surreal. It was kind of like a one of these, post-apocalyptic type movies. They had, I don't know if it was the fire department, the sanitation department, maybe some construction guys, came with cranes and had lifted all of the cars that had been stuck because the traffic simply stopped. They picked them up off the street and stacked them on top of the cars to either side, so emergency vehicles could go through. And I walked right, dead center down the street of, again, whether it was Trinity or Greenwich, I can't remember, and through a tunnel of cars, because they were 2 or 3 high on either side of me. And these streets are very narrow, so it only fits like 3 cars to begin with, 3 cars wide. And the dust and ash from the Twin Towers was at some points ankle deep. So it was like snow all over the ground, all over these cars. Everything was covered. And I mean, there may have been other people. Granted, like I said, it was between midnight and 2 o'clock in the morning sometime. But if there were any people on the street other than me, I didn't see them, because I was just kind of so focused on doing what I was doing. And I was like this, completely alone in this, for these 2 or 3 blocks, in this really, really strange world, again, of cars stacked up on either side and this dust and ash just everywhere. But you could see the lights ahead from where the Twin Towers actually had fallen, and that's where I was headed. Go ahead.
You talked about your previous visits that there have been times you'd been on streets in New York while you were doing your patrols or whatever. Nobody there,
Oh, absolutely, yes.
But how different was that situation compared to those past? Granted, you knew what you were heading towards, but how different of a feeling was it with nobody on that street as you were walking that way?
Well, the only word I can say was just, it truly was just bizarre. It was, like I just said, something out of the movies, because it was so unreal, to have cars, and you didn't expect any of it. You didn't know what to expect.
Right.
And to walk to start, leaving the park area was fairly normal, except again for all of the army, police, paramedics, just, miles of people there. And then this, I don't know what it was, 2, 3, 4 block stretch that I walked solo by myself, and the cars being stacked up, to my immediate left and right, the dust everywhere. It was really just very, very strange, very bizarro, like a monster movie, and so I did, and then as I approached, you get closer, you heard things, you could hear them working on the pile, and I got there and I just kind of paused for a minute, and I'll kind of, if I can relate this to you, you were talking earlier about baseball. I know you guys are baseball fans. Myself, I'm not a big sports fan, but I remember the first time I went to a night game in Yankee Stadium and being at awe of I was actually working. I was a police officer at the time, and I was working a game, and walking through those long, narrow concrete tunnels to the unbelievable bright lights that happen in a night game. And that's kind of what it was like. It was all dark and dreary and miserable and so strange and bizarre walking up to the site. And then when you got there and everything was lit up by these giant lights, and the dust and the smoke, coming from the wreckage, coming up through all these spotlights that they had all over the place, it was just bang, this just unbelievable sight. I mean, obviously it was not a good sight like when you go to a baseball game,
Right.
but it was wild. It was impressive, I guess impressive is the word I want to use, to see it. I had to pause for a second and just kind of take it in. And luckily for me, when I say luckily, just the way I walked, there was a THV right there, just across the street. A THV is a temporary headquarters vehicle.
Yep.
And it's kind of like a giant mobile home. And so whenever there's, a riot or something like this, the police department has to set up a headquarters. And so they park it wherever they need it. All right. And I knew exactly what it was. And I went and let myself in there. And they were very, very busy at the time with all of their, organization and logistical things that they're doing. And the lieutenant said, can I help you? I said, hey man, I'm here to help you. You tell me what you need and I'll do it. And he immediately told me, he says, well, forget about the rescue efforts. He says, we have plenty of people for that. And let me just go back to where I was telling you about, witnessing that giant mound that once was the Twin Towers. The Twin Towers were so big that this pile of debris was actually stories high.
Yeah.
It wasn't, 10 feet, 20 feet. I mean, it was, 10 stories high. It was 100 feet high. It was giant, and just twisted metal and steel. I'm sure you guys have seen photographs, smoke coming out of it. And if I can say beautiful, I mean, there were hundreds, if not over 1,000 men climbing all over this thing. All right. Trying to help people, trying to find people. You had the spotlights, but you could see all the flashlights and, things that guys had on their heads, those like minor things with the lights on them, and handheld flashlights poking in and out and shooting out of all of this debris and twisted steel and broken glass. And again, the smoke coming out because the heat was unbelievable. It was a wild scene. And so he was right. He certainly didn't need me there because there were hundreds of guys doing it. He said, listen, you're a detective. He says, I can definitely use you if you want to help. And he walked me across the street and up the block to a high rise that was directly across the street from the Twin Towers. It was a giant office building. And in the first floor was a Brooks Brothers. If you guys are not familiar with Brooks Brothers, it's high-end menswear. It's,
Right.
all the Wall Street guys wear that stuff, And they had set it up as a temporary morgue. So they were bringing the body bags into this Brooks Brothers store. And, he walked me in there, introduced me, and he says, look, I have none of us here. There's nobody here. There was a guy, turned out he was a doctor that was there that was helping out. I couldn't tell you what kind of doctor. And he was kind of being in charge, but there was no organization, so to speak. He says, what I really, really would like for you to do is to, catalog all of these bodies. It's very important for, evidence to know who these people are. And so that would be my job for the next 5 days is I would, because I was there for 5 days. I arrived basically that Wednesday morning, and then I left that following Monday afternoon. And what he wanted me to do was, catalog everything that came in and came out. He introduced me around. There was a doctor there. There was a nurse there. She was from, I remember her. Unfortunately, I can't remember her name. Lovely young woman from Staten Island. There was a young girl there who really touched me because she was, I don't know, maybe somewhere between 17 and 20 years old, and she'd gotten in there with her boyfriend. She was also from Staten Island. She came across the ferry, because that's what they could do. The Staten Island ferry goes to Battery Park, which I had mentioned before. And so they'd come across and they sent her back. They said, no, we can't. We have too many people. There's nothing you can do for us. We don't need you. Please just go home. All right. She went home and she got dressed in her mother's scrubs. Her mother was a nurse of some sort, and got dressed in her mother's scrubs and came back and lied to the people. I'm going to get choked up now. All right. I didn't think I was going to do this. So she lied so she could come. And her boyfriend lied and said he was a paramedic. Neither one of them were anything. They were young kids. But they came because they also felt that they had to be there. They had to be a part. And because she was, thought to be a nurse and he was thought to be a paramedic, they stuck him in the temporary morgue too. And really, I don't want to say they were useless. They were tremendous help, but all they were basically doing was helping move the bags. The firemen and police guys, the ESU, that's emergency service guys, and all the other guys that were assisting would bring the body bags in, and basically drop them off. And at that time, because there was no me there at that particular morgue, let me just back up a second too. I believe there were 4 or 5 other morgues besides mine that were temporary morgues where we would process, catalog these bodies, and then they would be picked up and taken to the proper morgues, which were also overrun. So mostly they went to refrigerated trucks where they were held, is where they ended up going in the end. But so, yeah, there were this handful of people there. And even the doctor, really, there was nothing to help or to fix, it was just a matter of it was a logistical thing. And these were bodies that had to be processed and cataloged for future use. So that was my start. That's where I landed. And it kind of gets you how I ended up being there. And that's it. If you have some questions, then I'll move on to just kind of tell you my experiences once I was there.
Rich, go ahead.
What was this might lead into that, but what was the demeanor? You talked about the lieutenant. Was he calm, cool, collected? Were there a bunch of people freaking out, or were they just like knew what they thought they had to do and were able to just complete their task?
Okay, so for the most part,
were they scared?
I would say absolutely everybody that I can remember, to my knowledge, all right, including the young girl and her boyfriend that I was talking about, had a very professional demeanor. This was an incredibly serious situation. Everybody realized that it was very, very serious. At the time, we really didn't know if it was going to happen again at any moment. And that was a concern. People were afraid of that. But when you're in serious things, like, and both of you guys are school teachers, so I'm sure you've had some sort of training and possibly even some experiences, possibly with a child maybe having an epileptic fit or, some sort of mental issues or whatever. Your training kind of takes over. You have to deal with the job at the moment. And even for myself, there were many, many times after I'd gotten home and years later where things may bother me. I might get emotional, and I can do this about 9/11, but also about many cases I worked at during the police department. At the time, you're just not thinking about that. You're getting through the moment. You're getting through the day. And in this case, we were getting through those days because it was day after day after day. Now, at the temporary morgue where I worked, when I got there, we started with, it was probably, 5 people there when I arrived. Let's say I was number 6. As time went on, we got 2 or 3 more. We probably ended up with a team of about 8 right there But we also lost people, like that young couple I had mentioned, they had left. The one nurse had to go home, believe it or not. The hospital that she worked for was threatening to fire her if she didn't come to work because they
Wow.
needed people there. And they're like, you have to come to work. You can't not come to work. And she says, no, I'm not leaving. From what I understand, she had gone home, for hours, if not the entire day, and then returned the following day. So we did see her come back. And shame on me, I wish I could remember all these people's names because they really were fantastic people. And even the doctor who had worked with us, I want to see he had left maybe on day 4, the day before I did. And that's that. So overall, I remember one time there was what do you call it? A fire commander of some sort, got into an argument with the doctor, who again, the doctor was, uh, there was no organization, but in his mind, he was the boss, and it had to do with, what is the word I want to use? Just keeping track of everything. I'm sorry, I can't think of the word I want to use right now.
Cataloging?
What's that?
Cataloging?
No, just the I can't think of it. I'll think of it. But anyway, it doesn't matter. They had an argument of whatever, and passions were high, tempers were high, and they exploded at each other, which was completely unnecessary and unprofessional, but I completely understand it because they were both so unbelievably stressed out. Nobody had ever seen, most of these people have never seen anything like this before. Even if you were in the fire department, yeah, you dealt with a lot of things, but this was just massive. It was massive and so scary. And so anyway, yeah, we were there in that location for 2 days. And part of the fear and why we had moved is for those 2 days, it seemed like, I don't know, every hour, every 2 hours, they would blow these whistles, like kind of like an air horn type deal, like you were working in a factory. It would go off, right? And everybody would run from where they were because they were afraid another building was going to come down. How they could tell this, I don't know. If they had some kind of seismographers up, I would imagine, and they could feel movement in the earth or movement in the buildings. And it was, a very scary thought that one of these buildings could come down on top of you. And so everybody would take off. The entire scene would disappear in every different direction, running down the street until you'd hear the horn go again, which was kind of like an all clear, and then we'd all go back to work. And so, geez, we went through that for about 2 days before we moved across the street to, we set up a new location in a Burger King that was kind of kitty corner from the Brooks Brothers. And that location was no good. It was just very small and very uncomfortable to work in. And a lot of we couldn't move the furniture around because it was all stationary, things like that. About a half a block to a block down, because I want to say Trinity Street, was the high school for leadership or something like. New York City has many, many special high schools. They're public schools, but they're specialty high schools that you test into for whatever. You probably heard of. You remember Fame was art and music and art was Fame. If you remember the movie Fame.
Yeah.
Okay. There's Bronx Science, Brooklyn Tech. There's all kinds of specialty schools, and the high school for leadership was there. And we decided that's where we were going to set up the morgue. And the fire department came with giant saws and cut all the glass out of the windows so it would be ventilated for us. And that's where we set up the morgue, and we started working there. So yeah, where were we? Overall, the demeanor of everybody was very, very good. Very professional. One of the things, talking about professions and just people in general, back to the mountain of men climbing all over that thing. There were people from all over the country and from Canada that I saw. There was, speaking of Canadians, there was a Canadian ambulance that had shown up, and they were helping us. They would take bodies from our morgue and take them to the city morgue or to the refrigerated buses, wherever they were. And I just chatted with the guys for a little bit, and they were like, yeah, we just started driving down here. They were all at work when it happened. And I don't know if they were from Montreal, probably. I'm going to assume that's the closest big city to New York City. And they drove down without permission. in their ambulance to do what they could do. And I just thought that was phenomenal, Firemen showing up from just all over the country, and you could tell because they all had their different patches, their different names on their jackets and things like that. One fireman who's kind of, I guess, become a little bit of a ghost to me. He was from Elizabeth, New Jersey. Now that I'm sure I would never recognize him now, but if I saw his face from that day, I would know immediately. And a small Puerto Rican guy from Elizabeth, New Jersey. He was a fireman. And he would show up, once or twice a day for the first 2 days when we were in Brooks Brothers. Again, very professional, very soft-spoken, searching for his sister, who was missing. They didn't know where she was. She worked in the area or in one of the towers, and they couldn't find her. And he just he couldn't help himself. He knew we weren't going to find her, but he couldn't help himself. He had to come. I'm sure he was hitting up all the other morgues too. Like I said, I saw him like twice a day for 2 days, and then I didn't see him again. Yeah, I'll never forget that poor bastard, because there was when people tell you about survivors and looking for survivors, to my knowledge, there were no survivors found after the fact. There were people that survived, okay? There were people that did come out, but as the days went on, there were none, okay? So many people, the heat was unbelievable. The collapse of the buildings, as you know, people who threw themselves from the roof, people who were hit down on the ground by debris. And to my knowledge, and I could definitely be wrong, but there were no survivors after that first morning.
I'll talk about a couple of things here real quick.
Please, go ahead.
The first thing you mentioned was when you got there, the beauty of the whole thing. I understand what you're saying, but correct me if I'm wrong. The beauty of it was the fact that there were hundreds of people there.
Yes.
on it.
No, it was not a physical beauty. So your listeners understand when I say that, because I could see how that word could throw people off, but it was so touching that I mean, there were thousands of people that came to help, that were not paid for it. Everybody wants to, pat the cops and the firemen on the back constantly for what had happened at 9/11. Understand that for most of us, and I'm not belittling us at all, please understand that, because we're going to talk more about, what has happened and continued to happen to so many first responders.
Right.
But you never hear them talk about the civilian employees, civilians that volunteers, rather, not employees, the volunteers that showed up, like the nurses, the doctor, and the kids that I had just described. The unbelievable amount of construction workers, the iron workers that were up there cutting, cops and firemen don't have the equipment to do that. There was all kinds of heavy equipment moving things around. There were guys up there, tens of feet in the air, hanging off of things, cutting steel girders in half with their torches constantly for days and days and days, pulling debris apart, looking for people, packing all this stuff up and sending it out to the landfills. And it was just amazing to see this many people down there for no other reason than just to do the right thing. There's no words to describe this, that they cared enough, all right, to put their lives on the line. And it turns out, unwitting to so many of them, they were putting their lives on the line because, as you know, more people have now died from cancer and other illnesses than actually died the day of. I think I want to say the correct number, and you guys can look it up, for the World Trade Center. This is not Washington, D.C. or the Pennsylvania tragedies, which also sadly are overshadowed by the World Trade Center, because I want everybody else to remember that it was not just the World Trade Center. But at the World Trade Center, the final number, I believe, was 2,977 people lost their lives on that day. But since then, over 3,500 people, and possibly now as many as 4,000 people have died from cancer and other illnesses. And that's what they're estimating. It could be many more who never made it to the doctor.
I just looked that up, and it says as of today, 4,627 responders have died, and survivors. I guess it says and survivors have passed from that.
Right.
Yeah. So is that because that's news to me? Is that just from all of the crap that got blown out into the air that everyone's breathing in over time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And as it happens to myself, now I've never looked at the complete list. I've never gone down to the museum. I've never returned since I left. I can't think of anybody that I know who actually died on location. Okay, that I knew personally, a friend or a relative that died there. Okay, I've been to dozens of funerals, and at the time we were going to everybody's. People you didn't know when it had happened, but in the last few years, and I want to say really mostly in the later years, because it takes a while to get sick. I know at least 11 funerals that I've gone to for guys who've died from 9/11 related illnesses. One of which, and the only one I'll mention, I could mention all their names, but I won't. One of which you all may remember. His name was Louis Alvarez. And Louis Alvarez, the way I say you may remember him, he was the one who sat with Jon Stewart in front of Congress and gave testimony. Now, me and Louis, we were friends before the police department. We were both young. We worked at we met at a nightclub called the Baja Club, where we both worked. It was on 72nd in Columbus. And excuse me. I was right out of the Army, and he was actually right out of the Marine Corps, and we hit it off fine. It was a whole crew of us that worked down there from the neighborhood and everything, and we were all, good friends. And me and Lou, we were close. We would we'd go out drinking together, chase girls together, work together. We'd get houses down on the Jersey Shore together for the weekend and stuff like that. We did a lot of stuff together. Sadly, just the way life goes, we kind of separated after joining the police department. It took us apart. I worked in the Bronx, he worked in Queens, and of course we got married and had our own families and children. And we, you do that thing where you talk a little bit and then you just don't see each other anymore. I was sitting in my house watching TV, and I had seen Jon Stewart on it because it was big. It was all over. They were talking, it's something that I took an interest in, obviously, because I personally am part of the World Trade Center thing they do at Mount Sinai. It's a study group where they go and they give you
the health program. Year. The health
Correct.
Program.
Yeah. Correct. Yeah. And I'm part of that study. And so I was curious because it was all about the refunding, and I'm watching. And I saw my dear friend, Louis Alvarez, on TV probably 10, 12, 15 times, and I never knew it was him. And then it hit me. I'm like, oh my God, that's Louis, because the cancer had eaten him up so much. He was such, I remember this beautiful, young, strong, 25-year-old man, and I don't know if this is, what you're doing today, if it's one of the things you're going to put up on YouTube or for your classmates or whatever classes, for your kids at school. But I'll do my best. I'll email you a photograph of us together when we were kids, and just to see him eating up to nothing, and I was just so ashamed of myself. I had seen him time and time again. And they said Detective Louis Alvarez, NYPD bomb squad, and here's a guy too, nice young working class kid, did well in the police department, became a detective, worked for the bomb squad. He got sick. From what I understand, he was the detail that searched all the rooftops, and so he was just up there breathing the stuff all the time.
And of course, it was rising, because it was rising. All that stuff was rising.
Yeah, it was probably on some of those rooftops. It was probably a foot deep.
Yeah,
and we're breathing all of that crap, and none of us had masks. I mean, it's funny, they were so nuts with the masks, 2 years ago over the whole COVID thing. I'm not going to get into that subject right now, but we didn't have anything. We were down there, just us, breathing it all in. And then slowly the Red Cross and other people did start showing up with masks, but again, they were the little paper, surgical ones, which were basically useless. And also, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't have worn them regardless, but if you've ever done anything, you cannot wear a mask for 10, 12, 15 hours a day working that way, because you can't breathe to begin with. It was
Right.
so hot and warm and sweaty. It was an awful scene. So yeah, that was my, one of my dear friends from before the police department was Louis Alvarez, who you saw on TV, if you remember him.
I can remember. Once I would see a picture, I would be like, "Oh, absolutely!" But I remember
remember
watching
Jon
the whole
Stewart.
Jon Stewart and having
Exactly.
somebody there with him. I do remember that. So, I wanted to go back just a little bit before we wrap up part one here.
Okay.
You talked about the body bags that would come in. Can you kind of talk about what all you were dealing with when it came to the body bags coming in? Because you had to identify, to
Correct.
the best of your ability, anything that you could.
Yes.
What were you dealing with those body bags?
Okay. So while I was there for the 5 days that I was there, again, just to back it up a little bit again, too, if you remember, I said that there were, to my knowledge, no survivors after the initial incident. The reason that there were not, because so many victims were absolutely just incinerated to dust. They were gone. There was nothing. There was nothing left.
Right.
And out of the 86 bags that I helped to process, that I processed or cataloged over those first 5 days, there was only one that was an actual, complete, intact, undamaged body. And that was of a young Spanish woman, very nicely dressed. She was a businesswoman who I can only surmise was walking on the sidewalk and probably hitting the head with something. There was nothing, no even visible injuries, no broken bones, no giant gash in her skull. She just must have been, hit in the head and killed, and that was it. The other, 85 were parts and pieces and bits. Some, were very, very discernible. We get a leg, things that I can remember. One, just things that strike you odd. You can't help it. One was just a leg. It was an entire leg, from about the hip down. And the guy had tweed wool pants and argyle socks and these brown wingtip shoes. And I remember them just because they were all really nice. I mean, you could just feel the quality. You could, and I'm looking at this stuff and cataloging it and writing down the different colors of the fibers, because you never know. You write all of this stuff down because you never know when it goes, wherever it goes, but it goes to the victims' families, that they can say, yes, that was my husband's, my father's, my son's shoes. Those belong to him. That's what he was wearing that day. So you want to be as meticulous as possible. And in doing so, I tried to be as meticulous as possible. And it just, things that you remember. There was another fella who came in. This happened a lot. So when I describe it, maybe an expert could explain why, but I can only imagine it was because of the blast and the heat, but because of a sudden shock of heat or a sudden blast of heat. Many of the body parts that we would find would be completely intact. I mean, the skin almost looked sunburned, but was completely intact, okay? But completely hairless, all right?
Okay.
So this one guy came in and he had no clothes. Quite often, I think the clothes were either burnt off or completely blasted off the bodies from whatever happened. Again, I couldn't technically tell you. And this poor guy was half a body. He was just cut across his torso from his just under his left armpit down to his hip. Very, very clean cut. I don't know if it was probably a piece of glass or something went directly through this poor guy. Completely hairless again, no eyebrows, no hair on his head, no hair on his face, no hair on his body. Bright pink, but again, his skin still looked good, okay? And fairly clean, because some things were completely covered in filth and other things were not. And I just remember it, just such an odd figure. And he had a tattoo of a rose on his chest, you know, and you just remember it, things that strike you. But other than that, a lot of them, besides, arms, legs, heads, scalps, just pieces and parts, sometimes these guys would come and they would literally have, for lack of a better words, guts, just innards. And they would put it in a plastic bag and put the bag into the body. It still had to go into a body bag. So you get a complete size body bag that held 4 or 5 pounds of completely unrecognizable stuff. The doctor even had a hard time sometimes identifying it because it was, especially once you got to be 3, 4, 5 days into this thing, it was just a gray mass of stuff, you know. But we would write down anything we could, if it appeared to be a kidney or intestines or whatever it was, I would just scribble it down on a piece of paper, and you'd put that to the number that was on the bag, and everything would be cataloged so that later on it could be found, identified somehow, either through DNA or through whatever. Wedding rings, necklaces, earrings, anything at all that you would find would have to be written down. And yeah, out of the whole time, there was only one out of the 86 bags that I did that was that one poor woman that was completely intact. Everything else was parts. Some parts were quite large, but other parts were very small. Did I answer your question? Did I go off the
absolutely. Yeah, that was what I was kind of looking for, because some people hear body bags, they think full bodies, and but no, you weren't.
There were very few full bodies, at least for what we got. I don't know what the other morgues got, because from where we were, I can only assume everything was coming directly across the street. And excuse me, it was sort of dead center of where the towers were from where I saw. In fact, quite often when we were, even though it sounded like, we were 86 bodies is probably 17, 18 bodies a day, but they would come 5 at a time, and you would do nothing for hours,
Right.
And, I would sit in a chair that I pulled out there, and I just watch and see what was going on. And again, watch all the lights at nighttime, or in the daytime, you could actually see the bodies of people just climbing all over this thing, and the machinery and everything that was going on. But what I was saying, so I can only assume that there were dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of bodies that were collected and picked up along the way that were taken away prior to me arriving, number one. And then we probably just may have not had a lot of fully intact dead bodies on the sidewalk where we were, for whatever reason. I couldn't tell you.
So before we wrap up this part, Richie, do you have anything to ask real quick before we?
Can we continue with the second part?
Okay. My question was going to be real quick was, what was there time for sleep? Did you want to sleep during those 5 days, and where did you sleep?
It gets into a thing where it was funny at the funny. There's nothing funny about it. Yes.
Funny strange.
Funny strange. Thank you. We would all do it. At first, no, because at first you're just too, in this strange world. Now, again, myself, between my military experience, my police experience, it's always eat when you can, sleep when you can, and that's a rule,
Yeah.
And just like bringing underwear, you always have to take care of your feet. And a soldier or a Marine understands exactly what I'm saying when I say take care of your feet, because you need them. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
And you need to eat, even if you're not hungry, because you might not eat later, and you need to sleep whenever you can, because you may not later, So I would always be taking cat naps whenever I could. And I would have to tell other people to do the same, because they're so go, 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 go. And the civilian mentality, they don't think of the long run. They don't think of self-preservation as much as, look, this is such a horrible thing. I'd say, listen, honey, if I was a girl, listen, guy, whatever it is, do me a favor, get some sleep right now. We got nothing going on. Try to close your eyes, because if you don't, you don't. And Brooks Brothers was actually fairly comfortable outside of where we were, because it was a nice department store.
Right.
So there were places you could go and lay down, catch a couple Z's on some carpet, roll up some clothes and sweaters. Here's a story. Just because people are so sometimes short-sighted or career-sighted or whatever. We had a boss come in from the police department. I don't know if he was a captain or inspector or something like that throwing a fit because we were giving any workers that came up. Now remember, we're not giving this away to the general public, okay? In the evening, it was September. In the evening, it would get cold, and especially when you're covered with sweat and filth and whatever. Anybody that came in, we were helping them out, man. Take some sweaters, take some jackets, take whatever. And they were this individual who showed up, and again, he was a higher ranking police official, was all uptight that this was corruption and we were stealing. Are you out of your mind? All of this stuff, besides being covered by insurance, it's all going in the trash because nobody's going to want to buy 9/11 clothing.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And you have people who are breaking their ass across the street. Okay. Who are cold because they weren't prepared. They didn't pack the little bag that I packed.
I guarantee you, Brooks Brothers had no issue with it.
I'm sure that they didn't, but they're so uptight about
being out of touch with reality.
Absolutely. And they're so uptight about corruption and, you know, somehow getting in the news. I don't know how anybody would give a shit about that, to tell you the truth, but that was a little anecdote there from, you know, the files of unbelievable nonsense. Was this captain going to town on this poor doctor like he's in charge of something about giving stuff away, you know? I just snickered to myself because I didn't care. I'm giving anybody needs something, you can have it, you know? So.
Well, we're going to wrap up part one. We've got a lot to talk about still about this event, life-changing event for so many millions upon millions in the entire country of the United States, and even to an extent the entire world. But Travis, I appreciate it to this point what you've been willing and able to share. Richie, we're gonna take a break and kind of regroup for a second, and then we'll come back for part two and talk with Travis Myers, former NYPD detective. He's author of the Tommy Keene novel series, but he was also at the unbelievable, and I'll say awesome in the effect that it was very awe-striking event of September 11th, 2001. Welcome back to the 500 Section Lounge, the September 11th special that we're having with our guest, former NYPD detective Travis Myers, who was actually retired at the time, but did go and volunteer his time at the wreckage of Ground Zero at the Twin Towers in 2001. Travis, thanks again. I appreciate your willingness to share what you had going on during that time. I really do.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Richie, I know you had a question that we cut off part one, but this is a question that is a pretty telling of the immensity of it all.
Yeah, so it could be hard to get the exact answer here, but it's just in my mind. Wanted to ask. You talked a little bit about how all of the, I guess, rubble and stuff was about 10 stories high, but just how, you know, the expanse of it, how big was it? How wide was it? How long did it go, for our listeners to kind of get an idea of just how much crap is there?
Oh, geez, I can't answer it. Well, I can answer it honestly. I can't answer it accurately there, Richie. But the World Trade Center itself, okay, was comprised of seven different buildings. All right. Everybody knows it as the Twin Towers, which were just the two Twin Towers that you see, you know, on every postcard, right?
Right.
But it was 7 different buildings, the 2 Twin Towers plus what would it be, 5 smaller ones? I'm getting my math right. And to see it once it was down, I had been there many times when I was younger. Funny enough, I'd never been to the top. I never went there as a tourist. I went there because I used to deliver liquor. I worked for a liquor store, and we used to deliver liquor down there, especially during the holidays. And I'd be in and out of there several times a year. And what was I going to say? So it was a very large complex of these 7 different buildings, which was about 3 blocks. So if you know what a New York City block is, it's kind of got a short side, which is about 100 yards long, I'm going to say, and then a longer side, which is about twice that. So the World Trade Center was about 3 blocks long by 3 to 4 blocks wide, going east to west, north to south. Okay. So it was a massive, massive area. It was a really giant area. And when I say too, when I was looking at it and saying that the debris was, 10 stories high, that's just me remembering. I can't tell you exactly how high it was, but it was a mountain, just a mountain of twisted metal and steel. I'm sure, you've seen photographs of it at the time and after the fact. And if you put that and cover that over what would that be? 3 by 3 would that be 9 square blocks? Am I doing my math
Yeah.
properly?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
that's what it would be. It would be like a 9 square block mass of, metal and broken glass and, twisted rubble. It was giant. And I know we used in the previous episode, the word awesome. It is, to the truest definition of the word, it was an awesome sight. It was huge. And again, the smoke coming off of it, the dust whirling around it, the lights from all the men that were working on it, and just literally hundreds of guys crawling all over it. It was an awesome, awesome sight to see. And when I say awesome, I do not mean that in the good way at all. I mean it in the grand way, in the unbelievably, geez, all these words sound good. Fantastic, awesome, grand.
Well, and
But
that's what
it's amazing.
I was
Just
going to
this
say.
giant mess that it was.
I was going to say there are a lot of times people use words almost exclusively in one manner when
In one
it can
context,
actually
correct.
have a meaning both ways, like the word consequence. That's just a result for your actions.
Correct. It
So
could be
a lot
good
of
or
time,
bad.
yeah, they can be good consequences or they can be bad, but many times consequences is used in the negative term, and
Correct.
awesome is the same way, but in the good way. A lot of people, man, that's awesome, because it's awesome
Yes,
in a good way. Something can be awesome in a very bad way too, to
absolutely.
where you look at, you're in awe, you're speechless, you can't put into words what you're seeing, and that can be in a negative way as well.
As I had in my brief description in the beginning of our last episode, when I first made my way to the to Ground Zero, to the World Trade Center, I paused. I mean, I couldn't tell you if it was a minute or if it was 5 minutes, but I just stood there and in awe of what I was looking at. It was,
Yeah.
oh my God, I can't believe what I'm looking at, especially being there before. I had been there many times, and as a teenager, and probably into my 20s, and I was shocked.
I can
And I was
remember
awestruck.
I can remember, I'd never been to New York City until just a few years ago, so it was well past September 11th. But I can remember having friends that took trips to New York City, and this was well before cell phones. They did uh my friend's mom actually laid on the sidewalk to take a picture of my buddy who was standing in front of the tower to get the whole tower from, and to have that picture and see that, that's an immense building, and both of those fell. And so you can only imagine how, and that's an awesome picture in a good way, but you can only imagine if you didn't witness it yourself. It's an awesome, awe-striking view to see those immense buildings are no longer standing, they're all in a pile.
Yep. And then for us too, for not all of us, but New Yorkers, as a kid, the Twin Towers went up. I want to say it was 1970, so I was like 5 years old when I went up. Okay.
Yeah.
And when I was very young, I lived on 11th Street, which was in the lower part of Manhattan. And I don't remember them being built by any means, but I remember them my entire life. Walking in between blocks and looking down and having that overshadow you, those big buildings, especially when it was pre-high rise. Back in the early 70s, it wasn't loaded with Manhattan was not loaded with high rises as it is today.
Right.
Most of that happened, in the mid to late 80s. Anyway, and then it was just gone. I mean, just a giant pile of rubble.
So your 5+ days end there at the
Yes.
at the wreckage and the rubble. You have to be exhausted, but yet you're still going, because I'm sure the adrenaline is probably still there.
Well, it's you do what you have to do and you do what you feel you need to do. Now on that Monday, most of us were still there. I wanna a shout out again. I don't know this person's name, and who knows if he'll ever listen to this. But I know I'd mentioned the nurses and the kids from Staten Island. There was a businessman, and I remember him. He was a nice guy. He was probably about my age, and again, I was like 35, 36 at the time, 2001, right? So I was 36 at the time, and he was my age. He was a business guy from California, and he had gone there for a business meeting, and he couldn't leave when it happened. Everybody else that he was with disappeared. Everybody that was there, when that disappeared, they have no business being at the World Trade Center anyway after disaster, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this guy stayed, and again, he had nothing to bring to the table. He wasn't a professional. He was a professional, but not a professional in this realm. But he couldn't leave, and he stayed right up until the last day with me, and he wanted to stay, but the what had happened on the Monday, the feds came and took over. So it was about day 5 when the federal government showed up. Not that they weren't there already, but they had just we're going to take over everything now. They put the umbrella over everything, and that may seem like a long time, but again, people have no idea the logistics that go into these things. Things like this or other natural disasters. It's a lot of moving parts to get things going. And they told me that I could stay if I wanted to, that, I can continue working. And had it not been that the feds were there, I would have continued to work, for the city. But now it was just going to be like a whole change, a whole new regime. I wasn't going to be reporting to the inspector that had been coming by, who I did not know. Funny enough, we knew different people. Once I had left, I was talking to other friends. Oh yeah, I know Kelly. He's a good guy. Blah 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 blah. But at the time, I didn't know who he was. But he was a gentleman, and I didn't want to deal with anybody new. I was tired. I was beat up. I was out of clothing.
Your
and
underwear had run out.
exactly. And so I decided, yeah, maybe it's time to call it quits, and I'd go home. But I just wanted to give that, for whatever reason. If ever this guy listens, he was a good man who decided that he could not leave New York City in its time of need, and came down and ended up getting planted with us and just helped move body bags around for 5 days. And that's, again, back to when I had mentioned beauty, the beauty that continues to astound me.
Mm-hmm.
The humanity that many, not all of us, but many of us have, this humanity to do the right thing, to help out their fellow men when they truly need help. And you'll see it every time that there's a hurricane or a tornado or earthquake or whatever kind of natural disaster there is, these horrible fires that are going on in Hawaii right now. They're going to talk about all the, politicians who aren't doing their jobs, and they're going to lay blame on, the I don't know, the police chiefs or the head of the fire department or whatever, but they always forget about the people who are always there, and they are always there to help their fellow man when people really need help. And so that's why I wanted to throw that guy out there. I wish I had his name.
Well, and I would absolutely say, and I've been saying this for a long time, especially in the world of instant news that we live in now, is there are plenty of good people in this world. There are
Yes.
many more people that are good in this world. But it doesn't sell newspapers. So
Oh no, not at all.
So
I
it
truly
doesn't get
believe, I know
reported.
we've touched on this in the past. I truly believe that 90% of the world's population are decent people.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yep.
And loaded with flaws,
sure.
we can beat each other up about that all the time, but they're not, awful, criminal-minded, hurtful people. They're just decent people that want to get on with their lives, and that I truly believe that 90% of the population is that way.
Yeah, there are evil people, don't get me wrong, but the people
certainly.
that do some bad things aren't necessarily the people that are evil. They're human beings,
Right.
That's part of life. So you ended up leaving, and you gave us some notes beforehand, and you talked about that you walked back to where your mom worked.
Yes, my mother at the time was working for, I don't know if you remember, what's her name? Oprah Winfrey had
Yeah.
a TV channel for a while called O. She had branched out. She had O Magazine,
Yep.
O TV, whatever. My mother, she had a simple job. I think it was accounts payable or something, where she would, part of just a cog in the whole world of, of the Oprah Winfrey channel. And it was at Chelsea Market. Funny enough, a place that my brother was working soon after that, because he was a detective, a squad detective in the Bronx, and he got sucked into intel to help chase terrorists. And his office, they ended up putting a kind of what is the word I want to use? A secret office for these guys in Chelsea Markets, which was the same place that my mother had worked. But he wasn't there at the time. So anyway, I walked up there, and yeah, it was again just back to the strange, surreal world that New York City turned into. Once I left the mayhem of that 9/11 world and walked, I don't know how many blocks it was, up to 16th, 17th Street, where my mother was working. Again, it was just, strange, empty streets, blocked off by police officers. I was actually stopped by some police officers, didn't realize, what I was doing or whatever. They searched my bag. They searched everything, because they were, again, so afraid of more terrorist attacks.
Right.
And believe me, I was not unhappy about this. They're doing their job. They're doing the right thing. And even after I identified myself, they wanted to go through everything, because you don't know, I could just be a nut with a badge,
Right.
And so they searched me, and that was fine. But I went up and I went up and I sat with my mother for a little while, and I waited for her to get off of work, because it was about that time for her, 5:30 in the afternoon. And, chatted with the girls that she was at. It was just very strange. Looked out the window and saw, uh, where the Twin Towers once stood. And then my mother and I rode the bus up. I got off at 42nd Street so I could catch the train back to Brewster, where I lived. And my mother went to bed and rest of the way home.
You mentioned that you were walking by and you were dressed the way you were dressed. It was just a t-shirt and jeans or whatever, but you had the dust from Ground Zero area on you.
Actually, yes, I'm glad you brought that up. So there was a interesting thing. It's going to start here, but I want to talk about some other stuff. If I get lost,
Sure.
I can bring it back to it. Yeah, we were, I was filthy. I was covered in this white dust that was all over my jeans and sneakers and in my hair. And even though I wasn't a guy that was digging through everything, it was everywhere, So you had this, this beaten, beleaguered kind of, almost like I was hanging sheetrock all day, because it said, white dust on everything,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so every time you leaned on something or sat down, it would be on you, And walking back, and then later taking the bus, and then later catching the train in Grand Central Station to go home. It was weird, because once you got north of, let's say, I don't know, 14th Street back into Midtown of New York City, it turned back into New York City. People were going to work. People, like my mother was, people were going to work. Life was fairly new. People were eating at restaurants. People were hailing cabs. It turned back into a regular world than the strange world I had just left for the last 5 days. But people would, and not everybody, you remember there's thousands of people walking around, but people would see you and lock eyes with you, or just lock on your image and know that where you were coming from, down closer to the World Trade Center. People had lined up, like, I remember seeing this. I didn't see it personally because I didn't walk that way. My way was a much more quiet way. But, they were down there with signs, and every time a police car or a fire truck or, soldiers from the army or anybody would come by, they would cheer them and, had signs, thank you signs and things. I mean, thousands of people showed up to cheer us on as we did the things that we did. To step back again just a second, while we were there, I know we had talked about sleep and eating and stuff like that. It did take a day or two to get, and not even that, the Red Cross, who are true professionals at this, and if you're going to gift to things, the Red Cross is not a bad thing to gift to. But all kinds of restaurants, bars, pubs, McDonald's set up tents all over the place to feed us. So, there was no shortage of food or water. People would come by with, cases and cases of water for us wherever we were. And again, the Red Cross was there from the first 10 minutes that it happened. They show up because they're professionals, right? But to walk the 2 blocks over and, McDonald's to get your Egg McMuffins or your Big Macs or whatever, they were making them on the street. They had street setups where they can make regular McDonald's, all kinds of people who own really big fancy restaurants, that we probably wouldn't go to day to day anyway because it was out of our price range. Bang, they were out on the street making us food. And it was a back to the beauty of it, the people getting together were beautiful. So yes, back to your thing, people would notice and just, have that strange, kind of twist their head look. This is not a normal construction worker walking by.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And they knew, you could tell that they knew who I was. In fact, there was, I think when I was over by 42nd Street getting into Grand Central Station, there were, for lack of a better word or description, guys that I knew were bad guys. I'm a police detective. I'm a cop. I know who the bad guys are. I know who the good guys are, right? And, the one guy kind of looked at me and gave me a wink and said under his breath, "Thank you." And it's touching, and I guess what I kind of wanted you to bring me back to, and it's something that is so, so disheartening. And it's not just the political climate that we're in right now, in 2023. Okay. But every time people lose sight of the important things in the world and the important things in our lives. All right. And I remember I had read something. It was one of those, what are those stupid things that people put up on their phones and computer memes?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And this little meme though was so perfectly written. I wish I had written it myself. And it had to do, it said, I wish every day was September 12th. And then he described, whoever this person was, described, how sadly it was over a common enemy, but how everybody in New York City and across the nation and across the world, okay, stood up for what was right and what was good and was kind. Crime went down in New York City. People didn't take advantage, believe it or not, even the worst of the worst did not take advantage for these few weeks afterwards because everybody was in such, shock that this could happen to us. And it really was a beautiful time. And I remember getting in the train and riding home on the Metro North. And there was a nice, upper middle class, I don't know how to describe her, woman that was there, going up to wherever her house was in Westchester, And when I say this, I'm talking about, somebody who had more money, more class, whatever word I want to say, And she was sitting across from me and she couldn't bring herself to say the words, but she reached over and put her hand on my knee for a second, And man, that meant the world to me. It really did. And of course, the worst of the worst, not the worst, but I got home. It was, already getting dark when I got home. And where we lived just a block from the train station. So it was an easy walk for me. I had to walk across this church parking lot. And we had this, it was our first house, just a little 2-family house we had in Brewster. And it had a nice, for me, it was, I grew up in an apartment my whole life. So a house is a big deal for us,
Right.
But it was an old Civil War era house. And we had patched it up and fixed it up. We had bought it, this broken down house. And had a big front porch that went the entire length of the house. So it was very Americana, if you will, And my wife had strung up this very large American flag, not the 3x5, so it was probably like, maybe 8 feet wide. All right, big one.
Yeah.
It put it up, and she had in each of the, I don't know what I'm going to call them, sections of the porch. You have the posts that come down, right? She had a candle burning at each one. And oh man, that was it. That hit me hard, and the whole situation hit me hard, and the last 5 days hit me pretty hard. And I had to stand there for 4 or 5 minutes and really kind of compose myself before I went into the house, or I would have just been, I just would have gone to pieces, But I sucked it all up, as a man does. And I walked across the street after taking it all in and just, hugged and kissed my children and hugged and kissed my wife and just loved them like I never loved them before, And if there's anything that I could tell the public out there, you guys and everybody that may be listening, all right? Every once in a while, all right, you really got to grab your loved ones and tell them and let them know how much you love them and how important they are to you. Because sadly, we don't do that every day.
Right.
We all say, "Oh, I love you, I love you, I love you, mom, I love you, dad, I love you, honey," but it's not the same thing as when you stare them right in the eye, man. You let them know that you are there for them and that they're in your hearts, because tomorrow, man, it could be anything. And it could not 9/11, forget about 9/11. I know that's what we're talking about, but it could be a car accident, it could be a slip in the bathtub, and then they're gone. And you didn't express what you wanted to express to them, So please, listeners, do that. Make that your mission today on 9/11, and maybe, at least once a month, let people know how much you really, truly care about them. Because in a blink of an eye, they're gone, man. And that, if 9/11 gave me anything, it did really hit me hard with that, how, bang, snap of a fingers, just like that, boom, it could be over for any one of us.
Yeah, and I guess that you answered what I was actually just getting ready to ask. You answered with that last statement was,
And I don't want to cut you off either, but I want to get this out while it's in my head.
Yep, go ahead.
One of the biggest crimes or sins of 9/11 and about terrorism in general, all right? Because, the terrorist act is going on all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that really did hurt me, and in retrospect, it didn't hit me so much then as it did days or weeks later when you kind of start to put everything together in your head. Because like we had talked about before, when you're doing these jobs, you're thinking about the job. You're not looking at it in the big picture. But all of those poor people, the majority, not all of them, but the vast majority of all the people that lost their lives on that day were regular people. Just like you, just like your wife. Cops and firemen, we sign up for crazy shit. All right. And we do ridiculous things. We do stupid, moronic things. They really are. The things we do are crazy, but we do them because we sign up for them, because it's in us to do these stupid things. Right. We can't help it. That's the way we're built. All right. It doesn't make us better or worse than anybody else. But I mean, guys who are, guys who are just going to work, women who are just going to work so they could feed their families. They got up that morning, took the train in, took a car in, they drove in from New Jersey, from wherever it was, in all aspects of life, from $1 million stockbrokers down to busboys working in restaurants, were murdered that day for no other reason than ridiculous religious ideology that had nothing to do with them. They weren't soldiers. They weren't fighting for our country. And I'm not saying that that's okay to kill them either, but if you get what I'm saying, back to the soldiers sign up to be soldiers. They sign up to go into harm's way. Busboys do not. All right. Stockbrokers do not. Secretaries do not. These poor, God, I can never forget those, the 911 calls, those poor secretaries leaping to their deaths because they're afraid to catch on fire.
That was
because they were alive.
Their best hope.
Yes. I'm not going to burn to death. I'm going to leap to my death. All right. And their biggest sin in the world was going to work that day. And that is just such a god awful, tragic thing. And that's something that I want people to remember too. Again, they always remember the cops and the firemen. Yes, we should remember the first responders who go out of their way and intentionally go to these places. But all those, children on the airplanes, going on vacation. You're going on vacation, for Christ's sake. You get on an airplane to have one of the best times of your life, a vacation, a wedding, who knows what it was. And now you're dead because of these savages, And anyway, I'm sorry. I went off a little tangent.
No, you're fine. That's what our show does. We go on tangents. But the one thing I always did, and I mentioned this at the beginning of part one, was, whenever September 11th came around, it was always, no matter what we were doing, we stopped it and we talked about what happened that day. And one of the things I had the students do was we watched. It was an abbreviated portion of it, but there was, I'm sure you can still find it on YouTube or something, that it was called The Voices from Within the Tower. And what it was the backstories from these voicemails from people, or phone calls from people that they made while they were trapped in the towers, making their calls to their loved ones, telling them, I'm going to be fine, or whatever. It's amazing to hear some of the steadiness in some of these people's voices when you knew they weren't going to make it, and they were keeping their families as calm as possible to understand that, look, just understand. And there were multiples that were panicked, but there were some that were just absolutely, we're going to be fine, we're looking for a way out, just know though I love you.
Yes.
And it was, those to me are more effective and more striking. And it kind of goes on what you say, is make sure you're telling your loved ones you love them. And it's
You have to. You absolutely have to.
because you don't want to be, and you said it's not always 9/11, but it's one of those that, if you get in a situation and the avenue of contacting you isn't there, or your loved ones isn't there, they need to know it, and yeah, they know it. And I use the air quotes there just for the fact that, yeah, you say it, hey, I love you, or what, but really make it hit home that, I'm there
Absolutely.
for you no matter what, and I love you. And that part is the silver lining, I guess, if there was one. You talked about all the wishing every day was September 12th. And I know
Yes.
this is a long little diatribe, but I just wanted to kind of set this as, I'm always looking for that silver lining, because bad stuff happens. It's inevitable that bad things are going to happen, because we're human beings, and yes, there is evil. And there's always going to be a silver lining. And I think September 12th was that silver lining, where we weren't black, we weren't white, we weren't Hispanic, we weren't New Yorkers, we weren't Hoosiers from Indiana. We were all Americans, and we loved one another for it.
Yes. And that was a beautiful time. Sadly, of course, and it for, like you had mentioned, well, that it was your JFK moment, and
Yeah.
what your mother had always spoken about. And it it's in no comparison. And when I say that, as unbelievably awful as 9/11 was, to compare it to the whole of World War II, it's, again, it's just something that's not comparable.
Right.
Although, for the people that it happened to, it was every bit as much the same.
For sure.
But, and granted, it was so much more before my time. But listen, my grandfather was a World War II vet. My father-in-law was a World War II vet. And the way that they talk about America at that time, okay, when the entire nation got together, which did not happen for the Korean War or the Vietnam War, sadly.
Right.
Okay, but got together against a common enemy, and took care of their veterans, and respected their veterans, and respected the women who were at home taking care of business, respected, the Rosita Riveters and everything else, and everything that went into it. It just strikes me as, I hate to use the word romantic because it seems like I'm belittling it, but such a much more beautiful time. And for me, for my time, again, my JFK moment, if you will, would be the weeks and months after 9/11, when people did cling to one another, respected each other a little bit more. Like I said, crime actually went down in New York City, which is amazing. That it was like a pause. They hit the pause button, the bad guys did, for a little bit, and I don't know where to go with that, but it was a very, very difficult, emotional time for the nation as a whole.
Richie, go ahead. You got anything?
No, I'm just taking it all in, man.
Okay.
I mean, I know this can't be easy to talk about, but yeah.
I do have a question, and you talked
Please.
about the horns when you're in the makeshift morgue. You'd hear the horns or the sirens go off.
Yes.
That you had to evacuate. And I know this is an absolute real thing. The PTSD that the rescue workers and the people that or the things that, it could be something minor that really just pulls it back. Do you have like, let's say, if you hear a horn or a siren or something that sounds similar to that, does it come rushing back to you?
Not so much for 9/11. And I don't know if it was with you guys, but I think it was maybe in our first talk ever, we had mentioned PTSD.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that I suffer from PTSD, but I do know that I have things, and
It's like
things that
triggers.
things, yeah, triggers. There you go. If I hear, maybe a loud backfire of a car or a, fireworks go off, something that I'm not prepared for, a very loud noise, not only will I jump, as all of us will, but quite often my hand goes to where my pistol would be.
Right.
It just naturally does, And I remember I was looking at I do a lot of real estate, not a lot, I do a lot of real estate. I do some real estate, and usually I buy old banged up houses that nobody in their right mind would buy. And I was walking with a guy one time, a friend of mine. We were looking at a house together, and he took note, something that I had never noticed before in my life. But when going through some of these old, banged up buildings and houses, he says, every time you open a door, you put your hand on your hip. Now, quite often I do carry a firearm with me, but I carry it in my front now, not where my pistol belt would be. But he says, I notice every time you open that door, your hand rises to the right side of your hip where my pistol, and that may be one of my PTSD type things, if you will.
Yeah.
Again, I don't feel that I suffer from anything. Although as far as 9/11, to get back on the 9/11 subject, I also avoid it because there's no reason. It's not that I avoid it because it's going to shake me up or I'm going to have nightmares or I won't be able to sleep. I would just rather not try. If it's on TV, when this comes out, it's going to be a couple of weeks from now, and it's going to be all over the news again, like it was, every year, and they're going to do the ringing of the bell and the naming of the names. I don't watch it. I've never gone down to see the museum. I probably never will. I've never returned to that part of Manhattan. I probably never will. I'll talk about it. I don't have a problem talking about it. I don't if it comes up in conversation. I don't wear memorial T-shirts and things like that. In fact, quite often, and I certainly don't want to insult anybody. So please, listeners, don't take it that way. But a lot of times with that, what we call it in the police department, we call it buffy, police buffs, guys who do all the talking, never do anything, empty suits at work, but around the Thanksgiving table, they're heroes,
Yeah.
And I kind of feel that way about a lot of the memorabilia, or the people who, and again, I'm not trying to insult anybody, so don't take it that way, but the people I'm talking about who, if we're talking about 9/11, my cousin's aunt's uncle's father's best friend actually went to the World Trade Center the year before. So if it was a year later, he'd probably be dead. That's how they attach themselves to it, because they have to attach themselves to it somehow, and it doesn't insult me as much as I almost feel embarrassed for these people, if you will, and that's how I feel about the memorabilia and everything. I just want to avoid it. I don't want to think about it. It was something that happened, unfortunately. It was something that, I was a part of. And I'm not going to say unfortunately there, even though that there are ghosts or things that haunt me about it. But somebody had to do it. And I was happy, I guess, to have the calling to go down and do anything that I could do. And let me tell you something, for the little stories that I told you, I did nothing compared to some of what these guys did. All right. What I did was nothing. I helped, and it was a great effort by thousands and thousands of people that, did what they could do to help out. And what I did was, barely remarkable in comparison to what other people did, so there you go for that. If I cover the PTSD thing, I don't feel, I don't feel that I suffer. I don't wake up with night sweats, and there are people that suffer terribly from it. Some people have, like I say, we say ghosts. Some people have terrible ghosts. I know a story of a man who was one of the bosses who sent, police officers into the building. He sent them in to help other people, and all of those dead bodies, to him around it, they were doing the right thing. They were doing what they had to do. They were helping others. But to be the man that ordered other men to their death is something. How do you live with that? How in the world do you live with that? So
You mentioned in your notes that you have some of officers, and you kind of even to a point have guilt from
Right. What you're
from
talking
the
about
situation.
is survivor's guilt
Yeah.
is what it's called. And many of us though, I probably have more of it just from the job in general than I do from 9/11, but definitely from 9/11 too. And it's a strange thing that you can't, guilty you always equate with doing something bad, so you feel guilty about it. But survivor's guilt is the way I understand it, and the way that I do feel from time to time is, why not me? Who am I to survive these things? Like for me, it's God forbid, like myself, I did lose like a third of my lung capacity from 9/11. Um, I used to be I wouldn't say an avid runner, but a regular runner, and I can't run anymore because strange thing, I think they're called bronchi, these little tree things that are in your lungs, and a third of them seized up and will never open again, you know? And so I don't, you know, I can breathe in fine, but forcing the air out of my lungs, it's a very strange thing that you have to get a doctor to describe it to you, all right, to explain it to you rather. Um, but when I go to these funerals of my friends and I see their wives and their kids, some of them who have almost, I want to say everybody that I know that's passed has been younger than me. You know, I had my one friend passed, geez, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago. And a lot of some of these guys, they're not my friends. The guys I know, guys I worked with,
Right.
he had passed. And then within a year, his daughter committed suicide. And I just can't imagine what that lovely, lovely woman that was married to him and that raised his two beautiful children is going through, that she has to live through that. And it's all because he went to work and breathed in shit that he shouldn't be breathing in, you know? And again, we sign up for this. It's what we volunteer to do, you know? Um, but that is just a god awful story. And so, yes, when I come home to my beautiful home and my beautiful wife, who I'm going to be married to for 30 years in May. We've been together 33 years. In May, we'll be 30 years married. And we're fun. We're getting married. We're getting married again. Every 10 years, we renew our vows and we have a little wedding. And so, if you guys are in New York, let me know.
Yeah.
No. And so we're going to have another wedding in May, which will be our fourth time being married. But anyway, when I come home to her and I see my beautiful kids at Christmas and everything else, sometimes it does, you will get that little nip at your heel that not everybody has this anymore. And that, you know, my brothers and sisters in the police department and guys in the fire department, and again, all those construction guys and all the just innocent people that were walking around, you know, who sucked the stuff into their lungs or were killed that day, they don't have it anymore. You know, my friend Louis Alvarez, who we talked about, beautiful wife, beautiful kids. Why him and not me?
Yeah. Yeah. It's I can completely
And
understand.
it's real. It's not
Yeah.
it's not, a side note or a what if. It's real.
Yeah.
Why him and not me? Why do I get to continue to have a beautiful life, to have great summertime, man? I got a swimming pool in the backyard, and we've had great barbecues and great times and listen to music and laugh. And all these families have been destroyed, you know? And so, yeah, that's where the guilt comes in, and it's not all the time, it doesn't haunt me, but survivor's guilt is a very real thing. And I, I, I don't care how small the town, it doesn't have to be the NYPD. I don't care how small a town you live in. The police officers and firemen who go to fires and paramedics who, again, I may have mentioned it before because it's a thing, they get no respect. I don't know why. They're saving people's lives every single day, you know? And sadly, in those same hands, they lose people every single day. And they got to live with it. Nobody cares that they do their job. They're certainly underpaid, you know? But I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that you're perfectly fine. I
Yeah.
totally get what you're saying, and I'm not at all comparing what I'm about to describe compared to 9/11 or what you're talking about. But I just had one of our family dogs pass away while we were gone.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I said was, why wasn't I here? And I get that that's a real feeling, in the fact that, you know, that you go through that. What could I have done, and why not, you know, why not me to be able to take that spot, you know? And so I appreciate the
We all do it.
that's that feeling.
We all do it, and we do it with everything. I just this year I lost my mother in February, and um, it was just a strange note. I'm going to go off on a whole different tangent here now. Okay,
It's fine.
my mother had Alzheimer's, which is a terrible, terrible disease. All right, and if you've lived with it, you know, or if you witnessed it, you know just how sad it is. And for the last year, she lived with us. Or last year of her life, she lived with us. And I know I did the right thing. You know, I brought her home with us and I built her a little apartment in my basement. Now, my basement's nice. It's not like a hole in the ground. It walks out. You walk out a main door and you
Okay.
step right into the pool area. It's a very, very nice setup we have. I built her a really cute little apartment down there. And, you know, I'm going to say, luckily for her and for us, the disease went rather quickly because, as you know, people can live for years and years with this.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
But I built this, you know, little place for her, and I brought her home with us. And my wife Christine did a terrific job of taking care of her. She actually quit her job, or took a leave of absence, I should say. She works at the same job now, but she took a leave of absence to take care of my mother, and, you know, bathe her and take care of her and feed her and make sure everything was good. And funny enough, she passed on my birthday of all days. And when people say, "Oh my God," I say, "No, don't say that. That was her gift to me, to put herself out of her misery. That was what she did." And I can't help it, though. And I will honestly say I did more than most people could do for their loved ones. It's not that they don't do it because they don't want to. It's because they can't financially. They don't have the room. They can't, whatever. So I'm not patting myself on the back for that. I still, you know, whenever I think of my mother, think I didn't do enough. I still think I should have brought her up here sooner. How could I let her live alone for so long? Did the loneliness, you know, and she didn't want to come. She wanted to stay where she was, but did the loneliness help, you know, perpetuate this disease? I don't know. You know, it's a strange thing, guilt. You know, it's a very strange thing. And again, this has nothing to do with 9/11, but we're talking about guilt now, where, you know, I can't think of anything more I could have done physically, financially. I took her to every doctor appointment. I would schedule my doctor appointments with her so we could go together, you know, and I could sit with her in the room and, you know, but did I do enough to say goodbye to her? Well, logically, you know, to look at it as an outsider, hell yeah, Travis, you did everything you could do. But I still feel bad that I wasn't there more, or every second, or I don't know, didn't take her to a restaurant on a particular day because I knew she wouldn't be able to order, or whatever silly nonsense that goes through your head, you know. And so guilt is a tricky thing, man. It can get a hold of you, you know. And so, yes, as far as survivor's guilt, just to get back to the subject, um, I mean, you know, I'm sure it probably aids in so many of the suicides that we hear about, you know, because people just can't stand to live with themselves anymore because they feel so awful about, you know, the whole why him and not me from 9/11, or from other terrible police incidents or fire incidents or whatever. So here you go.
Wow. Yeah, it's uh a note that you know, it's to get back to the September 11th part, that things, it happened over 20, almost 22 years ago. Well,
Yeah.
when people are listening to it, 22 years ago, and it's still something that you deal with on some level since then.
Yeah. Again, I don't feel, and I'm not belittling it at all. Certainly don't deal with it on a daily basis.
Right.
It's not a thing like that at all. You know, it does not, how can I say, it does not victimize me. I'm not a victim of 9/11, but there are things, yes, that I avoid. You know, when it comes on television, I change a channel, you know. Um, I won't go downtown to that area. You know, I don't think I ever will. I don't want to. You know,
Yeah.
I have a great life. I have a happy life. I'm a very
Sure.
positive guy. and I don't need that negativity in my life, so I avoid it, you know. And for my other friends who have lived it, usually when we talk about it is at the funerals, you know. We don't talk about 9/11. We don't talk about a lot of our police exploits. Believe it or not, people think that we have probably this little club where all we're doing is patting each other on the back about, you know, great cases or arrests or, you know, beating down bad guys. We don't. We talk about our kids and we talk about our wives and we talk about our new, you know, whatever it is, this new house I'm buying or I'm moving to Florida or whatever. We don't talk about all that nonsense because it's mostly negative. And for the most part, you know, at least the friends I have, we're positive people. And we'd rather talk about, you know, music, bands, television, anything else, you know. And I know that there certainly is a subculture, especially within the police department and especially within the NYPD, because we're the only ones that can maybe understand one another, truly understand one another, you know. But that's not what we talk about. You know, we have that brother and sisterhood, but it's not what we talk about all the time. It really isn't.
Richie, you got anything before we wrap up?
Well, I didn't. No, I didn't know if you wanted to get into the cleanup part of it and the length of time and things like that, or if we didn't record that part of our talk earlier.
Yeah,
You mean the cleanup of the site?
I guess what I wanted to do.
Yeah,
Yes.
I did mean to ask this earlier, so I'm glad you did. You ever go back after that 5.5 days to help?
I did not. But it went on for months and months. It went on for like a year or less than a year afterwards. It took them forever to get the debris out from ground zero itself. And then there was just a giant pit that lasted there for years until they rebuilt on top of it. And part of the problem that had happened with all the illness, all right, or probably the main contributing factor, especially for members of the NYPD, is that after everything was said and done and all the you know, the big part of 9/11 was over as far as the media was concerned, police officers and other civilian workers had to go to a place called Fresh Kills Landfill, which you can look up on your Wikipedia or whatever, find out more information about it. And they would search through all of the debris looking for remains, you know, again, still body parts or jewelry or teeth or anything at all. And, you know, or, and not only remains, but, you know, any evidence, because there still may be, you know, evidence pertaining to prosecuting people in the future. Okay. But, so these poor people had to go out there and do this, were constantly breathing more of the same nasty, horrible stuff that they shouldn't have been breathing, you know? And they did it, you know, you may be assigned down there for a day, you might be assigned down there for weeks at a time to have to go back and just dig through trash, dig through debris and search, you know, quite meticulously to see what you could find. And I'm gonna, as a personal note, it's certainly, although you always want to try to give everybody as much closure as possible. You know, closure is one of those big words that they like to use on TV all the time. But you were not saving anybody's life at all by going there and searching for remains. And sadly, it cost hundreds of lives to do it, because these people are now, you know, suffering from any number of cancers and other diseases that they contracted at the landfill. All right. While, you know, I know I've talked about this before, you know, I don't like to lay blame, because not only did we all volunteer for these things, but a lot of politicians don't know what the hell they're talking about anyway. But we were all told that it was safe. You know, we were told you could do this. And again, I never did it. I didn't go because I was retired. I didn't have to go, and I certainly wouldn't have gone had I been asked to, because it was all already after the fact. There was nobody to be saved. You know, my initial reaction of going to 9/11 was to help people, to save people. But the truth be told, after that first day, there was nobody to save. And, it was that's another tragic event where politicians and bosses, when I say bosses in the police department, the fire department, our city officials sent many men and women to dig through debris and contract all sorts of diseases that they're not dying from.
Well, and that's one thing it took 8 months to clear off the ground zero area.
Yep.
But that didn't mean the investigation stopped. So all that stuff was taken to a specific landfill, like you just mentioned.
Correct.
And then they had to do it all over again,
Yes, and they kept it separate.
Right.
It wasn't thrown into the trash. It was kept separate and then
Right.
gone through with a fine-tooth comb, dug through by hand, to see what could be discovered. And it could be, again, anything from, anything that's evidentiary to anything that is, from a victim to identify somebody. And who am I? I'm just a nobody in this big picture, to say that it was necessary or not. The fact that we were not saving lives and that it cost lives, in my book, I'm marking it down, is unnecessary. All right.
Yeah, because a lot of those people who still hadn't found, and you talked about the closure that need. A
Yes.
lot of those families already probably, I'm going to say most, just from experience of people, they already had their closure. I've seen, some interviews with people. They said we never recovered anything from our loved one, but yet we had that closure that we saw once those towers came down. We knew.
Yes.
We knew. So that was where probably most of the closure came from, because when you see something so horrific like that, the chances of survival are pretty slim, and
Absolutely.
that as a person automatically anyways. Travis Myers, this has been something that I've been looking forward to, in the fact that like we've said, such a memorable event, and not looking forward to in an exciting way, but yet exciting in the aspect of being able to talk to somebody that was able to witness things a little bit closer firsthand than I ever was. And I'm glad to know you because of other things, but for this as well, because you didn't have to go, but yet you knew you had to go,
Well, I had personally, I had to go.
That's what I'm saying.
There was no keeping me from this on that day. And why, I don't know. Again, people are built differently,
Yeah.
and it doesn't make me in any way, shape, or form better than anybody else, but it's in me to go, and I had to. Yeah. There was no not going for me. I wouldn't have been able to live with myself if I didn't.
Well, and I think that speaks to the person you are, because you felt the obligation within yourself that's what you'd done for so many years leading up to that point.
Yes.
And then to have this event happen, and you knew that was your obligation as a person, as a person, and you needed to do. That's what I'm going to thank you for, is being the person you are, to know that is something that you needed to do to be able to try and help anybody that needed to be helped in those situations. So for your part in that, I thank you for that, because you're a true humanitarian in the aspect of, you care about human beings. You don't care who they are. They were in a need for help, and you were more than willing to give any help that you could give personally. So for that part, I do thank you for that.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Richie, got anything?
Travis, thanks for coming on. Thanks for coming on. This has been quite an experience, interesting talk, and I really enjoyed myself. I know it's covering a very dark subject, but thanks for sharing your story. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's not going to be the traditional closer, Richie, in the aspect of lightheartedness, because this is a very dark subject in our country's history and world history. I mean, I'm sure there are countries that will at least talk about it in some aspects as a world history event, because it is, and it affected so many countries and people worldwide that it's a subject that a lot of people will remember for a long time. And something that I take it upon myself at least to try to educate some, give more about the topic, because we're so far separated from when it happened that a lot of people don't really know a lot about the topic. Again, Travis Myers, former NYPD detective and author of the Tommy King novel series, and also sharing his thoughts on or not his thoughts, his experiences on September 11th of 2001. This is something that we felt obligated to share in the aspect of keeping those people educated, and just kind of knowing that, the cliches, don't ever forget, but that's absolutely something that we don't ever want to forget, is not necessarily September 11th, but how we treated each other on September 12th.
Yes.
And that's
I like that you bring that point back.
yeah.
I do.
We all have differences. We live in different parts of the country, but all in all, we are Americans, and we should love one another for that purpose, in and of itself, for the fact that, we're all part of the same clan, I guess you want to say. No matter, we look different, talk different, doesn't make any difference. We're all Americans, and we should be treating each other with that same love and respect as being human beings too. So,
Amen to that.
Richie, this is going to the top of my list. This is really going to the top of my list. Loyal Loungers, we love you. We appreciate you. We are honored to be able to give you this talk and so many other great ones that we have with people. But the only thing you need to do is be there to grab a listen.
Grab a listen.
All right, there you have it. My 9/11 story. But if you take anything from my story today, please don't think of me. Remember the 2,977 people that lost their lives on that tragic day for doing nothing more than going to work. Please remember and never forget what happened on 9/11. And if you say a prayer or raise a glass today, do it for them. Until next time, my friends, thank you very much, and all the best. Listen up, this one's important. As a rule, I never stump for charities, because most of them don't hand out as much money as they collect, and that's a sad fact. But not Tunnel to Towers. These guys do the right thing. They have an A+ rating from Charity Watch, and a 4-star rating from Charity Navigator. That's like the #1 charity watchdog group, with over 93% going towards the families of veterans and first responders who have lost their lives in the line of duty. For only $11 a month, and it's easy. Just go to t2t.org. That's letter T, number 2, letter T.org, and hit the donate button. Do the right thing and do good for the families and the veterans and the first responders who do good by you. It's only $11 a month. Thanks, and all the best.